since we established that it's possible to understand how people can control their beliefs, what does Islam say about the blameworthiness of people who fail to believe in the correct religion? It's important to understand that there is a direct correlation between one's role and one's obligations. All right? So, there is a direct correlation between one's role and one's obligations. You see, a doctor by virtue of his role as a doctor has an obligation to know the best treatment for his patients. Likewise, a teacher, by virtue of him being a teacher, has an obligation to know how to best teach his students. Similarly, a parent has an obligation to know how to raise his children, and so on, right? Similarly, human beings have a role to play by virtue of them being human free agents when it comes to knowing how to acknowledge and serve God. We already discussed the importance of having correct beliefs about God. If one believes in God, as the vast majority of people do, then one would want to find out what God has to say about the purpose of our lives, how to treat people, whether there's salvation, whether God is pleased with us or not, whether we are indebted to God for our existence, etc. It's the duty of man to find out what his duties are. It's the duty of man to find out what his duties are. There's a lot at stake here, and the more there's a stake in something, the more crucial it is that we have correct beliefs concerning that thing. Now, but based on what we said earlier about belief control, we could imagine there are people who willingly choose to blindly stick to their religion in order to maintain relationships with their families and friends, as they feel that converting to Islam may compromise their familial ties. There are those who willingly stick to their kufr out of love for their tradition. The people could be kuffar because they're not willing to investigate the truth claims of other religions. They choose not to. It could be out of indifference or unjustified, misplaced overconfidence in their current faith. Regardless, a decision was made to not expose themselves to evidence for Islam, which they could evaluate. It was under their control whether to inquire further or not about religious truth claims, but they willingly refused to do so. There are those who willingly reject Islam for a host of reasons, but the point is that it's conceivable for us to imagine that people could willingly choose to believe something, even if evidence per se isn't playing a role in their decision making. Secondly, people could be kuffar because they didn't take the duty of religious inquiry seriously enough. It's difficult to offer an objective, precise standard of what constitutes sufficient religious investigation. But perhaps one useful method would be to compare investigative standards each respective person typically applies to other matters. For example, buying or selling a house, or investing a good portion of your money in stocks, or choosing a spouse, or relocating to a new country, or quitting your job, etc. We should contrast how much research and how factual people are when making decisions about some of the most important matters in their lives with their research into finding out what the true religion is. If someone's devoted far less time to investigating religious truth than say, deciding which new car to buy, then that says something about how important that person deems inquiry of religious truth to be. And yes, as a result, that person could be held morally culpable for carelessness in holding wrong religious beliefs. That person would not be justified in thinking he's justified in holding the beliefs that he does. Or contrast how one spends his free time spending hundreds, if not thousands, of hours watching movies and playing video games, compared to dedicating time to contemplating about his purpose in life. Right? الذين اتخذوا دينهم لهوا ولعبا وغرتهم الحياة الدنيا. Those who took their religion lightly and as a game and were deluded by the dunya.